She found out she was pregnant on a Tuesday morning, the kind of morning that looked ordinary from the outside. Soft sunlight slipping through half-open blinds, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the world moving forward without knowing anything had changed. But inside her, something irreversible had already happened. She stood alone in the bathroom, holding the test in her trembling hands. The two lines stared back at her, unblinking, undeniable. Positive. For a long moment, she didn't breathe. Her reflection in the mirror looked smaller somehow. Not weaker, just quieter. Like the version of herself staring back already knew that joy and pain were about to arrive hand in hand. She pressed her palm against her stomach, flat and unchanged, and whispered, "Hi." That was the first word she said to her child. Not, "We're pregnant," not, "Your father will be so happy." Just, "Hi." Because in that moment, it felt like the beginning of a private conversation, one she didn't yet know she would carry alone. Her husband, Daniel, was still asleep when she walked back into the bedroom. He lay on his side, facing away from her, phone charging on the nightstand. The faint glow of notifications blinked once, then disappeared. She noticed it, but didn't think much of it. Back then, she never thought much of anything that could hurt her. She sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping slightly under her weight. "Daniel," she said softly. No response. She smiled to herself, the smile of someone holding a secret too big to stay quiet for long. She leaned closer and touched his shoulder. "Daniel." He stirred, groaning slightly, eyes still closed. "What time is it?" "Doesn't matter," she said, her voice shaking now. "I need to tell you something." He opened one eye, annoyed more than curious. "Can it wait?" Her smile faltered, but only for a second. "No, it can't." That made him sit up. "What's wrong?" he asked, suddenly alert. She handed him the test. He stared at it, confusion first, then realization. For a brief moment, a single fragile moment, she saw something in his eyes. Shock, fear, maybe even joy. It passed quickly, like a shadow crossing a window. "You're pregnant?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes." Silence filled the room. She waited for him to smile, waited for him to pull her into his arms, waited for him to say, "We're going to be parents." Instead, he leaned back against the headboard and ran his hand through his hair. "Are you sure?" Her heart skipped, not in excitement this time. "Yes," she said. "I took 2 tests." Another pause. That's a lot," he muttered. She laughed softly, trying to lighten the moment. "I know, it's scary, but it's also—" "I wasn't expecting this," he interrupted. The interruption landed harder than she expected. She swallowed. "Neither was I, but we'll figure it out. Together." He nodded slowly, but his eyes had already drifted somewhere else. Not to her, not to the future growing inside her. Somewhere distant, somewhere unreachable. That was the first crack. She didn't know it then, but later she would remember that moment again and again, the exact second when Joy knocked and he didn't open the door. In the weeks that followed, she tried to convince herself that everything was normal. Pregnancy, after all, was overwhelming. Men process things differently. That's what people said. That's what she told herself when Daniel stopped coming to doctor appointments. "I have meetings," he said. When he started staying late at work, "It's a busy quarter." When he no longer reached for her at night, "I'm tired." Each excuse stacked neatly on top of the last, forming a wall she pretended not to see. She went to her first prenatal appointment alone. The waiting room smelled like disinfectant and hope. Women sat beside their partners, hands intertwined, laughing softly as ultrasound pictures were passed around. She sat in the corner, clutching her purse, smiling politely when someone looked her way. When the nurse called her name, she stood up, alone. Inside the exam room, the doctor asked, "Is the father joining us today?" She hesitated. "No," she said. "He couldn't make it." The doctor nodded, professional and kind, but there was something in her eyes, a quiet understanding that felt heavier than sympathy. When she heard the heartbeat for the first time, it was fast and strong. Tears filled her eyes. "There you are," she whispered. The doctor smiled. "Sounds perfect." She wished Daniel was there, but she didn't call him. She told herself she'd tell him later, when the timing was right, when he wasn't stressed, when he was more present. Later became a habit. At home, Daniel's phone never left his hand. He tilted the screen away from her when messages came in. He smiled at texts she never saw, laughed at jokes that didn't include her. Once, she asked casually, "Who are you talking to?" He didn't look up. "Work." She nodded. She always nodded. At night, she lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing, wondering when exactly she had become invisible. Her body was changing. Her emotions felt raw, exposed. Some nights she cried quietly into her pillow, not because she knew something was wrong, but because her heart sensed it long before her mind could accept it. Pregnancy sharpened everything, especially loneliness. One evening, she cooked his favorite meal. She wanted to tell him something important. She wanted to feel like a wife again, not just a woman carrying a child in a house that felt increasingly hollow. The table was set, candles lit, food warm. Daniel came home late. He barely noticed the effort. "Smells good," he said, distracted, checking his phone. She watched him eat, waiting for the right moment. "I felt the baby move today," she said softly. He paused for half a second. "Yeah?" "Yes," she said, smiling. "It was small, but I felt it." "That's good," he replied, already scrolling again. The silence stretched. She could have screamed. She could have accused. She could have asked questions she was afraid to hear answers to. But she didn't. She chose silence, because silence felt safer than confirmation. That night, after he fell asleep, she went into the bathroom and cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like everything else in her life had become. She looked at herself in the mirror, hands resting on her growing belly. "I promise," she whispered to her unborn child, voice breaking, "I will protect you, even if I have to do it alone." And somewhere in the dark, in a place she could not yet see, the betrayal had already begun. The house used to feel warm, not because it was loud or full of constant laughter, but because it felt shared, like two lives moving in the same direction, even when they walked at different speeds. Now it felt like a place she passed through. She noticed it in the smallest things first. The way Daniel stopped asking how she felt. The way he no longer noticed when she was nauseous in the mornings, kneeling on the bathroom floor, whispering apologies to a baby that had done nothing wrong. The way conversations became logistical instead of intimate. "Did you pay the electricity bill? What time is dinner? I'll be late tonight." No, "How was your day?" No, "Are you okay?" Just the quiet erosion of something she had once trusted completely. Her body was changing faster than her heart could process. Some mornings, she woke up filled with a strange, aching love for someone she hadn't met yet. Other mornings, she woke up feeling abandoned in her own marriage. She read pregnancy books alone. She learned which foods to avoid, how stress could affect the baby, how emotions traveled through the body in ways science was only beginning to understand. One sentence stayed with her longer than the others. A mother's emotional environment becomes the child's first home. She closed the book after reading that. From that day on, she made a quiet decision. If her marriage was breaking, her child would not feel it. Daniel came home one night smelling unfamiliar. It wasn't perfume, not exactly. It was something subtle, something that didn't belong to her home. She noticed it immediately. "Did you change soap?" she asked casually as she stood near him in the kitchen. He froze for half a second too long. "No," he said quickly. "Why?" She shrugged. "Just smelled different." He laughed, but it was forced. "Probably the office. They changed cleaning products." She nodded. She always nodded. Later that night, when he fell asleep with his back turned to her, she stared at the ceiling, replaying the moment again and again. The pause, the defensiveness, the unfamiliar scent. Her instincts whispered what her heart refused to hear. She placed both hands over her stomach, grounding herself. "Not now," she thought. "I can't fall apart now." So she didn't ask questions that would shatter what little stability she had left. Silence became her armor. Her second trimester was supposed to be easier. That's what people said. But emotionally, it was when everything became heavier. Daniel stopped touching her altogether. No accidental brushes in the hallway, no hand on her lower back, no goodnight kisses. She missed him in ways that embarrassed her. She missed the way he used to look at her, like she was home. One evening, she tried to bridge the distance. She sat beside him on the couch while he watched television, her movements slow and careful. "Do you want to feel the baby?" she asked quietly. He hesitated. "Feel the baby," she repeated. "The kicks. They're stronger now." He sighed, clearly annoyed, but placed his hand on her stomach anyway. They waited. Nothing happened. "See?" he said. "Nothing." She smiled weakly. "Sometimes the baby responds to voices." He pulled his hand away. "I've had a long day." And just like that, the moment was gone. She sat there, alone, her body warm with life, her heart cold with rejection. That night, she cried again, but silently so he wouldn't hear. Not because she was weak, but because grief, when unspoken, has nowhere else to go. At her next appointment, the doctor frowned gently. "Your blood pressure is slightly elevated," she said. "Are you under stress?" The question felt dangerous. She smiled automatically. "Just tired." The doctor studied her for a moment. "Make sure you're taking care of yourself. Emotional health matters just as much as physical health, especially during pregnancy." She nodded. But as she walked out of the clinic alone, her hand resting on her belly, she felt the weight of a truth she hadn't admitted even to herself. She was carrying more than a child. She was carrying a marriage that was already slipping away. Daniel's absences became more frequent. Late nights turned into overnight business trips, phone calls taken outside, texts deleted before she could glance at the screen. Once, while folding laundry, she found a receipt in his pocket. Dinner for two. A restaurant they had never been to together. Her hands shook as she held the paper. She sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, the room spinning. She could confront him. She could demand answers. She could scream, cry, accuse. But then she imagined the stress, the shouting, the uncertainty. She imagined sitting alone afterward, pregnant and emotionally shattered. She imagined the baby inside her absorbing every tear. So she folded the receipt neatly and threw it away. That was the moment she chose her child over the truth. Not because the truth didn't matter, but because timing did. Some nights, Daniel came home cheerful, too cheerful. He talked more than usual, laughed more than usual, touched his phone like it held something precious. She watched him with quiet resignation. Regret hadn't reached him yet, but it was already walking toward him, slowly, patiently. She just didn't know it yet. One evening, she sat alone in the nursery she was preparing. Soft colors, a small crib, folded baby clothes that smelled like detergent and hope. She sat in the rocking chair and rested her hands on her belly. "I know it's not how it's supposed to be," she whispered to her child, "but I promise you this. You are loved. Completely. Unconditionally." Her voice cracked. "And someday, when you're old enough, I'll tell you the truth. Not with bitterness, not with anger, just honesty." The baby kicked gently, as if responding. She smiled through tears. In that moment, she felt stronger than she had ever had before, and also more alone than she had ever been. Daniel stood in the doorway, unseen, watching her. For a brief second, something crossed his face. Guilt, fear, or maybe just discomfort. Then his phone buzzed. He looked down at it and walked away. Silence has a sound when you live inside it long enough. It hums in the background, low, constant, exhausting. She heard it most clearly at night. Daniel would fall asleep quickly, his breathing steady, undisturbed. She lay awake beside him, staring at the faint crack in the ceiling, counting the seconds between his breaths like they were proof of his presence. He was there, and yet he wasn't. She reached for him once, her fingers barely brushing his arm. The contact was accidental, or at least she pretended it was. He shifted away, didn't wake, didn't notice. Her hand fell back to her side. That small rejection hurt more than any argument ever could have. Her days became carefully structured. Wake up, eat what she could keep down, take vitamins, walk slowly around the neighborhood, rest when her body demanded it. She learned to measure her strength differently now, not by how much she could do, but by how much pain she could carry quietly. Neighbors smiled at her belly. "First baby?" they asked. "Yes," she replied, smiling back. "So exciting." She nodded. Excitement was easier to perform than truth. She stopped talking about Daniel to people. At first, she didn't notice she was doing it, but gradually his name disappeared from her stories. When friends asked, "How's married life treating you?" she answered vaguely. Busy. Different. Taking it day by day. No one pushed. People rarely do when answers are gentle enough to accept. One afternoon, she felt the baby move strongly for the first time. Not a flutter, not a suggestion, a clear, unmistakable kick. She gasped, pressing her hand to her stomach, tears flooding her eyes. "Oh," she whispered. "Oh, I felt you." She laughed softly, alone in the living room, overwhelmed by the reality of it. Life. Actual life. She grabbed her phone instinctively and typed a message to Daniel. "The baby just kicked. Really kicked." She stared at the screen for a long moment, then deleted it. She didn't want delayed excitement, didn't want forced reactions, didn't want to beg him to feel what should have come naturally. So she sat there alone, both hands on her belly, memorizing the moment for herself. Later, when Daniel came home, she mentioned it casually. "The baby kicked today." He nodded absent-mindedly. "That's cool." Cool. She turned away so he wouldn't see her face. As her body grew heavier, her emotional world grew quieter. She stopped expecting things. No more disappointment meant fewer wounds. She learned how to comfort herself. Long baths, soft music, talking to her baby in whispers. Sometimes she apologized to the child. "I'm sorry it's like this," she said once, her voice trembling.
I thought you'd be born into something warmer." The baby kicked again. She took it as forgiveness. Daniel started sleeping with his phone under his pillow. She noticed one night when it buzzed, muffled and urgent. He woke immediately, slipping out of bed and into the hallway. She stayed still, listening. His voice was low, intimate, a tone she hadn't heard directed at her in months. Her chest tightened. She didn't follow him. She didn't want to hear words she couldn't forget. When he returned, he avoided her eyes. "Everything okay?" she asked softly. "Yeah," he said too quickly. "Just work." She nodded. She always nodded. She began to understand something important during those weeks. Love doesn't always leave loudly. Sometimes it fades in silence, slipping away while you're busy trying to hold everything else together. And betrayal doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits patiently until you are too vulnerable to fight back. One evening, she stood in the shower, warm water running over her back, one hand bracing the wall, the other cradling her stomach. She cried there more often now. The sound of water covered the sound of her sobs. She let herself feel everything she swallowed during the day: fear, grief, confusion, longing. "I didn't imagine this," she whispered to herself. "I didn't imagine us like this." She wondered, not for the first time, if Daniel noticed her sadness at all, or if she had already become part of the background noise of his life. That night, she wrote a letter, not to Daniel, to herself. She didn't plan it. The words just came. "I will not break in front of someone who chose to look away. I will survive this with dignity. My child will never feel unwanted." She folded the paper and tucked it into a drawer. A promise. Outside, life went on. Inside that house, something was quietly ending, and something else, stronger, quieter, unbreakable, was beginning. There is a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when a woman stops suspecting and starts knowing. Not because she has proof, not because someone tells her, but because her heart begins reacting before her mind can lie anymore. For her, that moment came one ordinary afternoon. Daniel was in the shower. His phone lay face down on the bed. She wasn't snooping. She wasn't searching. She was simply putting laundry away when the screen lit up. A name flashed for less than a second before the notification disappeared. Not a coworker, not a friend she recognized, just a woman's name. Her breath caught. Not sharply, not dramatically, but in that quiet, sinking way that felt like stepping onto a stair that wasn't there. She stood still. The sound of running water filled the room. Steam curled under the bathroom door. The world continued doing what it always did, moving forward without regard for the moment someone's life cracked open. She told herself to ignore it. She told herself names didn't mean anything. She told herself pregnancy made emotions unreliable. And yet, something inside her shifted. From that day on, everything felt slightly misaligned. Daniel smiled differently, texted differently, left the room to take calls he used to answer freely. He became gentler with his phone than he was with her. She noticed how he angled the screen away, how he muted notifications at night, how he stepped outside to get air when messages came in late. Once, she asked lately, "Why do you always take calls outside now?" He didn't even look at her. Privacy. The word landed heavier than he intended. Privacy from his pregnant wife? She nodded. She always nodded. She began to feel like a guest in her own marriage. She cooked, cleaned, carried life inside her body, and yet she felt like she was standing on the outside of something that used to be hers. Some nights she lay awake, staring at Daniel's back, listening to him type messages in the dark. Tap, pause, tap. Every sound felt louder when your heart was already bruised. She imagined what those messages might say, what kind of laughter lived in them, what kind of softness he was giving someone else. The images hurt, but not as much as the realization that she was slowly disappearing from his emotional world. Pregnancy made her vulnerable in ways she hadn't expected. She couldn't numb herself, couldn't distract herself with wine or long nights out, couldn't run. She was rooted, physically and emotionally, so she endured. She focused on doctor appointments, on vitamins, on breathing through nausea and back pain and the ache of being unwanted. She stopped asking questions, not because she didn't want answers, but because she was afraid of how calmly she might receive them. That terrified her more than anger ever could, because anger meant there was still something left to fight for. Calm meant acceptance was already beginning. Daniel's absences stopped being accidental. They became patterns. Tuesday nights, Thursday evenings, the same vague explanations delivered with practiced ease. Client dinner, late meeting, team bonding. She learned to not wait up for him, not because she didn't care, but because disappointment was easier to manage when you expected nothing. Some nights she ate dinner alone at the kitchen table, one hand resting on her belly, the other pushing food around her plate. The baby kicked often then, as if sensing her loneliness. She spoke softly between bites, told the baby about the day, about the clouds outside, about how strong they were going to be together. She became her own emotional partner. The first time she almost confronted him, it was accidental. He left his laptop open on the couch. She wasn't looking for anything. She was just turning it off when a message preview caught her eye. A heart emoji. Not sent by him, sent to him. Her chest tightened instantly. Her vision blurred, not with tears, but with that strange pressure that comes when your body reacts before your mind catches up. She stared at the screen. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. One click, that's all it would take. One click and everything would collapse into clarity. But clarity wasn't what she needed. Not now. Her hand fell away. She closed the laptop gently, like it held something fragile. And in a way it did. It held the last illusion of peace she had left. That night, Daniel came home late again. He smelled familiar this time. His cologne, the one she bought him years ago. It hurt more than the unfamiliar scent, because it meant he was learning how to erase traces. "How was work?" she asked. "Long," he replied. She nodded. She always nodded. He kissed her forehead before going to bed. The kiss was quick, mechanical. She lay awake afterward, staring at the dark. She realized then that betrayal didn't always feel like being stabbed. Sometimes it felt like being slowly replaced. Her dreams changed during those weeks. She dreamed of standing in rooms where everyone spoke a language she didn't understand. She dreamed of calling Daniel's name and hearing someone else answer. She dreamed of holding her baby while watching a door close from the outside. She woke up exhausted, her pillow damp with tears she didn't remember crying. The doctor told her stress was common during pregnancy. She smiled and thanked her. What she didn't say was that stress wasn't visiting. It was living with her. Daniel stopped noticing her emotional shifts. When she grew quieter, he didn't ask why. When she stopped sharing small details, he didn't notice. When she flinched at sudden noises, he didn't look up. It was as if she had become a shadow, present but unimportant, and shadows don't ask questions. One afternoon, she saw them together. Not clearly, not undeniably, but enough. She was sitting in her car outside a grocery store waiting for a wave of nausea to pass when she saw Daniel across the parking lot. He was laughing, really laughing, the kind of laugh that came from the chest, not the polite one he used at home. A woman stood beside him, close, too close. Her hand touched his arm as she spoke. He didn't pull away. Time slowed. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure someone else could hear it. She watched as he leaned in slightly, just enough to confirm what she already knew. Then he noticed her car. Their eyes met. His smile vanished. The woman followed his gaze, confusion crossing her face. Daniel stepped back immediately. Too late. She started the engine and drove away before he could reach her. Her hands shook on the steering wheel, her vision blurred, not with tears, but with shock. That was the moment suspicion became certainty, and certainty felt hollow. He came home early that night. Too early. "You left the store without buying anything," he said carefully. "Yes," she replied. Silence stretched between them. He waited. She didn't speak. "Aren't you going to ask?" he finally said. She looked at him then, really looked. At the man she married, at the man standing in front of her, at the distance between those two versions. "No," she said quietly. Something in her voice unsettled him. "You saw me," he said. "Yes. And?" "And I'm tired," she replied. He frowned. "Of what?" She placed a hand on her stomach. "Of carrying everything alone." For a moment, it looked like he might say something honest. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it instinctively, and whatever truth might have existed disappeared again. "I'm going to bed," she said. She walked past him without waiting for a response. That night she cried, not because she had proof, but because she no longer needed it. She stopped imagining a future with him in it, not consciously, just quietly. She started picturing herself holding her baby alone, feeding, teaching, protecting. And in those visions, she was tired, but she was steady. Daniel existed only on the edges. That realization broke her heart and strengthened her at the same time. After the grocery store, something inside her went quiet. Not numb, not empty, just still. The kind of stillness that comes when the mind finally stops arguing with the heart. She no longer searched his face for signs, no longer watched his phone out of the corner of her eye, no longer waited for explanations that would never come. Acceptance didn't arrive with peace. It arrived with exhaustion. Daniel tried harder after that, not in the ways that mattered, but in ways that looked convincing from the outside. He brought home flowers once, ordered dinner instead of eating out, asked how her day was. Too carefully, too late. She answered politely. She smiled when required, but something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer trying to be chosen. She was surviving. Pregnancy moved into its heavier months. Her back ached constantly. Her feet swelled. Sleep came in fragments. She learned to rest sitting up, one arm wrapped around her belly, whispering comfort to herself as much as to the baby. At night, Daniel lay beside her, scrolling through his phone, unaware or unwilling to notice how she flinched at every buzz. One night, she asked softly, "Do you ever feel like we're living two separate lives?" He laughed lightly. "You're overthinking again." The word again cut deep. She didn't argue. Arguing required energy she no longer had. Her world became smaller. Doctor visits, short walks, quiet afternoons. She stopped sharing her pain with friends, not because they wouldn't listen, but because she didn't want to explain why she was still there, why she hadn't confronted him, why she hadn't left. The truth was complicated. She wasn't staying for him, she was staying for the life inside her, because stability, even fractured, felt safer than chaos. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes when the person sleeping beside you is the one who made you feel alone. She felt it most in the early mornings. Daniel would wake before her, shower quickly, dress in silence. Sometimes he left without saying goodbye. Sometimes he kissed her cheek out of habit, like checking a box he no longer believed in. She lay there listening to the front door close. Every morning felt like a small abandonment. Her due date felt far away and terrifyingly close at the same time. She began preparing in quiet, methodical ways. Hospital bag packed early, emergency contacts written down, baby clothes washed and folded. She didn't ask Daniel for help, not because she didn't need it, but because she had learned what happened when she relied on him. At her next appointment, the nurse asked, "Who will be in the delivery room with you?" The question landed heavier than expected. "My husband," she answered automatically, but the words felt hollow. On the drive home, she cried, not loudly, just tears sliding down her cheeks as traffic moved around her. She realized then that she didn't trust him to be there when it mattered most, and that realization hurt more than the affair itself. Daniel sensed the distance growing. He didn't understand it. In his mind, nothing had been confirmed, nothing had been said, so how could she be pulling away? "You don't talk to me anymore," he said one night, frustration sharp in his voice. She looked up from folding baby clothes. "What would you like me to say?" "I don't know," he snapped. "Something." She held up a tiny onesie. "This is something," she said calmly. "This is our reality." He fell silent. He had no response to that. She began imagining life without him, not as revenge, not as escape, but as survival. She thought about finances, about childcare, about work, not with panic, with planning. Strength crept in quietly, the way dawn does, slow and unavoidable. One evening, she overheard a phone call. Not intentionally. Daniel was in the next room, his voice low. "I can't tonight," he said. "No, not now. Because she's pregnant." The pause that followed felt endless. "I know," he continued. "I know this is complicated." Her hands froze. She didn't move, didn't breathe. That was the first time he acknowledged her pregnancy as an obstacle, not a miracle, not a responsibility, an inconvenience. Her chest tightened painfully. She waited until she heard him hang up before stepping into the hallway. He looked startled when he saw her. "Who are you talking to?" she asked quietly. He hesitated. "Work?" The lie didn't even hurt anymore. It just confirmed what she already knew. That night, she slept in the nursery, on the floor, curled around a pillow. Her hand rested protectively over her belly. She whispered into the darkness, "I've got you." And for the first time, she believed it completely. The next morning, Daniel noticed. The empty side of the bed, the closed nursery door. "Why didn't you sleep here?" he asked. She met his eyes calmly. "I needed space." "For what?" he demanded. She thought about all the answers she could give. She chose the simplest one. to breathe. He stared at her, unsure how to respond. He was losing her, and he felt it, but he didn't yet understand why. In the weeks that followed, she withdrew completely. Emotionally, mentally, spiritually, she stopped hoping, and in the absence of hope, she found clarity. Daniel's affair remained unspoken, but its shadow touched everything, and she had already begun stepping out of it. She could have screamed. There were moments, sharp, sudden moments, when the words rose to her throat like fire. Who is she? How long has this been happening? Was any of it ever real? The questions lived inside her, restless and demanding, but she never let them out, because she understood something that most people didn't. Once spoken, words could not be taken back, and once a truth was exposed, it demanded consequences she was not yet ready to face. So she chose silence, not because she was weak, but because she was protecting something fragile. Silence became her discipline. Every day, she woke up and made the same decision. Not today. Not today would she confront him. Not today would she unravel. Not today would she allow chaos into the body that was working so hard to create life. She read about cortisol levels, about stress and premature labor, about how fear could tighten muscles and restrict breath. She promised herself her child would not grow in fear. If someone had to suffer, it would be her. Daniel mistook her silence for ignorance. That was his first mistake. He believed that because she didn't ask questions, she didn't know. Because she didn't cry in front of him, she wasn't hurting. Because she didn't fight, she was fine. Men like him often confused peace with permission. She became careful with her emotions. She rationed them. Joy was reserved for the baby. Sadness was processed alone. Anger was swallowed whole. At night, she wrote in a notebook she kept hidden beneath folded sweaters. Not accusations, not confessions, just truths. Today, I felt invisible. Today, I felt strong. Today, I survived without breaking. The pages filled quickly. Her handwriting changed, firmer, steadier. Daniel tried, occasionally, to provoke a reaction. "You don't care anymore," he accused one evening. She looked at him calmly. "I care about what matters." "What does that mean?" he snapped. She placed a hand on her belly. "This." Her refusal to engage unsettled him more than any argument ever could, because silence left room for guilt to echo. Pregnancy reached its heaviest months. Her movement slowed, her breathing deepened, her patience became sacred. She learned how to say no. No to late-night discussions, no to emotional labor, no to explaining herself. She conserved her energy like medicine. One night, she almost broke. Daniel came home late, smelling of lies and distance. She sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, waiting. Not to accuse, but to see if he would tell the truth without being forced. He didn't. As he walked past her toward the bedroom, something inside her cracked. "Do you love me?" she asked suddenly. The question surprised them both. He froze, turned slowly. "Of course," he said after a pause that felt too long. She nodded. That was all she needed to hear, not because it reassured her, but because it confirmed what love was no longer supposed to sound like. After that night, she stopped asking emotional questions altogether. She stopped seeking reassurance from someone who had already left emotionally. Her silence was no longer defensive, it was deliberate. She focused on her health with quiet determination. Morning walks, breathing exercises, appointments kept religiously. She imagined strength moving from her heart into her bloodstream, then into her child. She spoke affirmations softly. You are safe. You are wanted. You are loved. Those words were never for Daniel. They were for the life growing inside her and for herself. Daniel began to feel the weight of her withdrawal. He felt it in the way she no longer reacted, in the way she didn't argue, in the way she didn't need him. Her silence wasn't loud, but it was final. She understood something now that she hadn't before. Confrontation gives answers. Silence gives clarity. And clarity was what she needed to survive what was coming next. As the weeks passed, silence stopped feeling like something she was enduring. It became something she was using. A tool, a boundary, a shield. She learned how to be present without being exposed. Daniel started watching her more closely, not with care, but with confusion. She no longer reacted the way she used to, no longer flinched when he came home late, no longer asked where he'd been. At first, he enjoyed it. Less tension, fewer questions, more freedom. But slowly, something else crept in. Unease. Because silence has a way of amplifying guilt. She stopped explaining herself. When she was tired, she rested. When she was overwhelmed, she stepped away. When she didn't feel like talking, she didn't. No apologies, no justifications. This wasn't rebellion. It was preservation. Her body felt heavy now, each step deliberate, each movement calculated. The baby pressed against her ribs, reminding her constantly that time was moving forward, even if her marriage was stuck in place. She found comfort in routine, morning light, warm tea, the sound of her own breathing. She learned how to ground herself when anxiety crept in, placing one hand on her chest, the other on her belly, inhaling slowly. I am here. We are safe. One evening, Daniel tried again. Why don't you ever ask me anything anymore? He said, irritation edging his voice. She looked at him for a long moment before answering. Because I stopped needing answers from you. The words weren't sharp. They were calm. That frightened him. He began staying home more, sitting in the same room, watching television without watching it, trying to feel included in a life she had quietly reorganized without him. He asked once, Do you want me at your next appointment? She paused. Yes, she said finally, if you want to be there. He nodded, but when the day came, a meeting ran late. She went alone. Again. And something inside her closed permanently. The doctor mentioned birth plans, pain management, support people, emergency contacts. She filled out the forms carefully. Her name, her information. Daniel's section remained blank longer than the rest. She filled it in eventually, not out of hope, out of practicality. At home, she packed her hospital bag, each item placed thoughtfully. Comfort clothes, a soft blanket, a small notebook. She added a letter, written weeks ago. No matter what happens, you did your best. She folded it and tucked it into the side pocket. Daniel noticed the bag by the door. So it's getting close? He said. Yes. He hesitated. Are you scared? She considered the question. Yes, she answered honestly, but not for the reasons you think. He didn't ask her to explain. Late one night, she woke from a dream where she was screaming, but no sound came out. She sat up in bed, heart racing, hands immediately going to her belly.
"It's okay," she whispered. "I'm here." The baby moved gently. She waited for her breathing to steady before lying back down. Daniel slept through it. She realized something profound in those final weeks. She was already doing this alone, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. The physical part was just catching up. Her silence had changed shape. It was no longer about avoiding pain. It was about honoring her strength. And deep down, she knew when the moment came, when everything finally broke open, she would not scream. She would endure.
Labor didn't begin with drama. There were no sudden cries of pain, no frantic phone calls, no rush. It began the way everything else in her life had begun lately, quietly. A dull ache in her lower back, a tightening in her abdomen that came and went, steady but patient. She noticed it early in the morning while the house was still dark. Daniel slept beside her, turned away. She lay there for a long time, breathing through the discomfort, counting seconds the way she'd practiced. Not fear, focus. She got out of bed slowly, careful not to wake him. In the kitchen, she made tea she barely drank, sat at the table, timed the contractions. They were real. She rested both hands on her belly. "It's time," she whispered, not with panic, but with calm resolve. She had prepared for this moment in ways no one else could see. When the contractions grew stronger, she woke Daniel. "Daniel," she said quietly. He groaned. "What?" "I think I'm in labor." That got his attention. He sat up immediately. "Now?" "Yes." He looked around, disoriented. Should we go?" "Yes," she said evenly. "We should." There was no excitement in his movements, only urgency. And something else. Fear, maybe. She watched him scramble for his phone, his keys. She noticed how he didn't touch her, didn't ask if she was okay, just moved. The drive to the hospital was silent. The city lights blurred past the window as contractions came stronger now, deeper. She focused on her breathing. In, out. Daniel glanced at her occasionally, unsure what to say. She didn't fill the silence for him. At the hospital, nurses took over quickly. Questions, forms, monitors. Daniel stood to the side, out of the way. When asked, "Do you want your husband to stay in the room?" she answered calmly, "Yes." She didn't look at him when she said it. This wasn't about him anymore. Labor stripped everything down to the essentials: pain, breath, endurance. She labored quietly. No screaming, no accusations, no emotional collapse, just determination. Daniel watched her from the corner of the room, unsettled by how composed she was. This wasn't how he imagined it. He had expected chaos. He hadn't expected strength. Hours passed. She squeezed the bed rails during contractions, sweat on her forehead, jaw clenched, but silent. A nurse whispered once, "You're doing incredibly well." She nodded. She already knew. At one point, Daniel stepped closer. "You can squeeze my hand," he offered awkwardly. She looked at his outstretched hand, then shook her head gently. "I'm okay." The rejection wasn't cruel, it was honest, and it hurt him more than anger ever could have. When the moment came, when everything narrowed to pain and purpose, she pushed. With everything she had, with all the strength she'd built in silence, with all the love she'd protected. The baby's cry cut through the room, sharp, alive, undeniable.
Tears streamed down her face instantly, not from pain, but relief. They placed the baby on her chest. Warm. Real. She broke then, but softly. "Oh," she whispered, "you're here." The world rearranged itself around that moment. Daniel stood frozen, watching. Something in his expression shifted. Regret flickered, but it was too early, too shallow to matter yet. She didn't look at him. She was too busy meeting the eyes of the child she had carried through silence. As the nurse asked questions, names, details, she answered clearly, strongly. When asked, "Would you like the father to hold the baby?" she paused, then nodded. Yes. Daniel stepped forward hesitantly. He held the child awkwardly, like he wasn't sure where he fit. She watched him, not with jealousy, not with anger, but with distance. She had already crossed a line he couldn't follow. Later, when the room grew quiet and the baby slept beside her, Daniel finally spoke. "You were incredible," he said. She turned her head slightly. "Thank you." 2 words, nothing more. She had said everything that mattered without speaking at all. That night, as she lay in the hospital bed, one hand on her baby's back, she realized something fully for the first time. She had endured the hardest moment of her life without screaming, without breaking, without him. And that knowledge settled into her bones like truth. The hours after birth felt unreal, like the world had softened its edges just for her. The room was dim, machines hummed quietly, her body ached in ways she had never known. But beneath the pain was something steady, relief. The baby slept beside her, small chest rising and falling, unaware of how much had already been endured for this single moment of peace. She watched every breath, memorized every sound. This was hers. Daniel sat in the chair near the window. He didn't know what to do with his hands, didn't know where to look. He watched her watch the baby, and something unfamiliar twisted in his chest. She didn't need him. Not now. Not here. That realization unsettled him deeply. A nurse came in quietly to check vitals. "She's doing great," the nurse said warmly. "You're very calm. Not everyone handles birth like this." She smiled faintly. "I've had a lot of practice being calm." The nurse didn't ask what she meant. Some truths didn't need clarification. When the nurse left, silence returned. Daniel cleared his throat. "You didn't say anything?" She didn't look at him. "About what?" "During labor, you didn't yell or get mad or anything." She finally turned her head. "I didn't have the energy for screams," she said quietly. "I needed it for survival." The words weren't accusatory. They were factual. That hurt him more. Later, when visiting hours ended, Daniel leaned forward. "I'll stay," he said. "You shouldn't be alone." She considered that, then shook her head gently. "You can go home," she said. "Get some rest." "You're sure?" "Yes." He hesitated, clearly unsure if he should argue. He didn't, and just like that, he left. Alone in the room, she felt something she hadn't expected. Not abandonment. Freedom. She shifted carefully, wincing as pain reminded her of everything her body had done. She whispered to the baby, "It's just us for now." And that felt right. The following days passed slowly. Doctors came and went, nurses checked in, forms were signed. Daniel visited daily, always briefly, always awkwardly. He brought flowers once. She thanked him. She didn't place them near the bed. He tried to talk,
about the baby, about work, about plans. She listened politely, but her answers were short, measured. Her silence had changed again. It was no longer protective, it was conclusive. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the window, Daniel finally asked the question he'd been avoiding. "Why didn't you fight?" he said softly. She looked at him for a long moment.
"I did," she replied, "just not in the way you expected." He frowned. "I don't understand." She glanced at the baby sleeping peacefully. "I fought for my health. I fought for this child. I fought to keep my dignity." She looked back at him. "And I won." That was the moment Daniel realized something irreversible had happened. She hadn't just endured, she had changed, and whatever power he once held in her life, it was gone. When she was discharged, she carried the baby out herself. Daniel walked beside her, holding the car seat. She moved slowly but steadily. No hesitation, no fear. She didn't look back at the hospital doors. She had already left that chapter behind. As they drove home, the city looked different, sharper, quieter. She watched the world pass by and thought, not for the first time, I survived without screaming. And now, there was nothing left to say. The house sounded different after the baby arrived. Not louder, just fuller. There were new sounds now, soft breaths in the night, the faint whimper before a cry, the rhythm of a life that depended entirely on her. She noticed those sounds immediately. Daniel didn't. The first night home, she barely slept. Not because the baby cried constantly, but because her instincts refused to rest. She lay on her side, one arm curved protectively around the small body beside her, every nerve alert. Daniel slept in the other room. He said it was so she could rest. She didn't correct him. Rest wasn't the reason he stayed away. Days blurred together. Feedings, diaper changes, doctor appointments. She moved through them with quiet competence. There was no dramatic adjustment, no breakdown. She had already learned how to function without emotional support. Motherhood simply revealed how prepared she already was. Daniel tried to help, in visible ways. He bought supplies, carried bags, offered to hold the baby when visitors were around. He was present in form, absent in feeling. She watched him hold the baby, awkward, distant, unsure where he belonged. He smiled when others were watching. She noticed how quickly he handed the child back to her when they weren't. They spoke less than ever, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything important had already been decided in silence. Their conversations were practical. Did you sterilize the bottles? What time is the appointment? I'll be late. No warmth, no intimacy, just coordination between two people sharing a space. At night, when the baby finally slept, she sat alone in the dim light of the nursery. Her body still ached. Her heart felt strangely calm. She rocked slowly, whispering lullabies she barely remembered learning. In those moments, she felt something close to peace. Not happiness, but stability. Daniel watched her from doorways. He saw how she moved with confidence, how she anticipated the baby's needs before a cry even began, how she didn't look for him anymore. That unsettled him. He had assumed she would need him more after the birth. Instead, she needed him less. One evening, he tried to cross the distance. "We should talk," he said. She didn't look up from feeding the baby. "About what?" "About us." She paused, then continued feeding. "There isn't much to say," she replied calmly. "That's not true," he insisted. "We're still married."
She looked at him then. "Yes," she said. "On paper." The words were quiet, but they landed with finality. He stared at her, stunned. "You're acting like I don't exist," he said. She shifted the baby gently against her shoulder. "I'm acting like someone who learned how to survive without expectations." He opened his mouth, closed it again. That night, she slept with the baby in her arms. Daniel lay awake in the other room, staring at the ceiling, realizing something he hadn't prepared for. He hadn't just lost her trust, he had lost his place. And there was no argument loud enough to get it back.
Visitors came in waves. Family, friends, people who smiled too brightly and spoke too loudly, as if joy could be manufactured on demand. They praised her strength. "You look amazing for someone who just gave birth. You're glowing. You're doing so well." She smiled politely. She didn't tell them that strength had stopped feeling like a compliment a long time ago. It had become a requirement. Daniel played his role well in front of others. He held the baby carefully, kissed the child's forehead, stood beside her in photos. From the outside, they looked intact, a family, a new beginning. But the performance exhausted her. When the door closed behind the last visitor, the silence returned, thicker than before. One afternoon, Daniel's mother visited. She watched closely, too closely, the way her son hovered instead of helped, the way the baby always ended up back in her arms, the way her daughter-in-law moved with quiet independence. "You don't ask him for help much," she said carefully. She shrugged. "I don't need to." The words weren't defensive, they were factual. Daniel's mother didn't respond immediately. She understood more than she said. At night, Daniel tried to re-enter her world. He stood awkwardly near the nursery door. "Do you want to take a shift?" he asked. She looked up, surprised, not by the offer, but how foreign it sounded. "You can, if you want." He nodded, picked up the baby. 10 minutes later, the crying started. He panicked. "I think she needs you," he said, already handing the baby back. She took the child instinctively, calming them within seconds. Daniel watched, a strange mix of admiration and displacement tightening his chest. He was no longer essential. Days passed. Her body healed slowly. Her mind sharpened quickly. She began making plans, not dramatic ones, not final ones, but quiet adjustments, budgeting, researching childcare, reorganizing her schedule. Daniel didn't notice. He still believed time was on his side. One evening, she overheard him on the phone again. "I'm busy now," he said quietly. "No, I can't talk. Things are complicated." She stood in the hallway, listening. Not with anger, with clarity. He still hadn't chosen, and by not choosing, he had already made his choice. Later that night, he tried to reach for her in bed. It startled her, not because it was unwanted, but because it felt inappropriate. She gently moved his hand away. "I'm tired," she said. He pulled back, frustrated. "You've been tired for months." She looked at him in the dim light. "Yes," she replied, "and you were gone for most of them." The truth landed softly, but deeply. After that, he stopped trying, and that hurt him more than rejection ever could have, because it meant she was no longer something he could win back. She was simply gone. The baby grew quickly, stronger cries, longer stretches of sleep. She watched every change with quiet wonder. This was growth she could trust. Predictable, honest, real, unlike everything else. One morning, as she packed the diaper bag, Daniel watched her. "You don't need to do everything alone,"
he said suddenly. She paused, then looked at him. I already did, she replied. She didn't say it with bitterness. She said it with acceptance. And acceptance, she had learned, was the most devastating truth of all. That was when Daniel began to understand. This wasn't a phase. This wasn't exhaustion. This wasn't postpartum distance. This was the result of choices made quietly, repeatedly, without regard for the cost. And now, the bill was coming due. The truth has a strange way of surfacing. Not all at once, not dramatically, but through cracks. And once those cracks appear, no amount of pretending can seal them shut again. It started small, a comment at a family gathering. "You're doing everything yourself," an aunt said casually, watching her soothe the baby while balancing a plate of food. "Where's Daniel?" She smiled politely. "He's busy." Daniel stood across the room, laughing with someone else. The distance between them was visible now. People noticed. Friends began asking questions indirectly. "How's marriage after the baby? Are you both adjusting okay?" She answered carefully. "We're managing." Managing was a safe word. It didn't invite follow-ups, but it didn't lie either. Daniel's phone habits didn't change. If anything, they grew worse. He left the room to answer calls, checked his screen compulsively, smiled at messages he didn't share. But now others were noticing too. His mother once caught a glimpse of his screen. She didn't say anything, but later that night she asked her quietly, "Are you okay?" That question, spoken gently without accusation, nearly broke her. "Yes," she replied after a pause, "I am." And for the first time, she meant it. She began taking the baby out alone. Morning walks, doctor visits, short trips to the store. People assumed Daniel was working. She didn't correct them. Silence had become her language. One afternoon, Daniel came home visibly tense. "There's a rumor going around at work," he said. She looked up calmly. "About what?" "About me," he replied sharply. "About us." She waited. "They're saying I'm distracted," he continued. "That I'm not fully committed lately." She said nothing. "They're questioning my reliability," he added. "It could affect my position." She met his eyes then. "Actions tend to do that," she said softly. The words weren't cruel, they were inevitable. That night he slept poorly. For the first time, consequences felt real, not emotional ones, professional ones, reputational ones, the kind that couldn't be soothed with excuses. Meanwhile, she continued rebuilding quietly. She updated her resume, reached out to an old colleague, researched flexible work options. Not because she was leaving, but because she was preparing. Preparation felt empowering. The baby smiled for the first time one morning. A real smile, unmistakable. Her heart expanded instantly. She laughed, tears filling her eyes. Daniel was in the room, but he missed it. He was on his phone. She didn't point it out. Some moments weren't meant to be shared with people who weren't present. One afternoon, Daniel came home visibly tense. "There's a rumor going around at work," he said. She looked up calmly. "About what?" "About me," he replied sharply. "About us." She waited. "They're saying I'm distracted," he continued, "that I'm not fully committed lately." She said nothing. "They're questioning my reliability," he added. "It could affect my position." She met his eyes then. "Actions tend to do that," she said softly. The words weren't cruel. They were inevitable. That night, he slept poorly. For the first time, consequences felt real. Not emotional ones, professional ones, reputational ones, the kind that couldn't be soothed with excuses. Meanwhile, she continued rebuilding quietly. She updated her resume, reached out to an old colleague, researched flexible work options, not because she was leaving, but because she was preparing. Preparation felt empowering. The baby smiled for the first time one morning. A real smile, unmistakable. Her heart expanded instantly. She laughed, tears filling her eyes. Daniel was in the room, but he missed it. He was on his phone. She didn't point it out. Some moments weren't meant to be shared with people who weren't present. The truth did not explode. It spread. Quietly at first, like smoke slipping under doors, a whisper in the hallway, a look held a second too long, a conversation that stopped when Daniel entered the room. He felt it before anyone said anything directly. Something had shifted. At work, meetings grew colder. People who once laughed at his jokes now nodded politely and moved on. His name stopped coming up in conversations about future projects. He noticed how his manager avoided eye contact. "How are things?" Daniel asked one afternoon, forcing a smile. "Busy," his manager replied. "We'll talk later." Later never came. At home, the contrast was unbearable. The baby thrived, soft skin, bright eyes, a laugh that filled the room without effort. She watched it all with quiet joy, completely absorbed. Daniel watched too, but from the outside. He tried to join in. "I think she recognizes my voice," he said once. She didn't respond, not because she disagreed, but because she no longer felt responsible for making him feel included. The first call came on a Friday afternoon. Human resources. They wanted to clarify a few things. Daniel's hands shook as he hung up the phone. "This is serious," he said when he got home. She was bathing the baby, warm water sloshing gently. "Yes," she replied calmly. "It usually is." He waited for panic, for tears, for reassurance. None came. The meeting was worse than he expected. Professional, measured, cold. They didn't accuse, they presented. Dates, messages, complaints. A pattern. "This raises concerns about judgment," someone said. Daniel nodded numbly. For the first time, excuses failed him. When he came home that night, he looked smaller, deflated. He sat at the kitchen table long after dinner, staring at nothing. She passed him quietly, carrying the baby to bed. "Can we talk?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. She paused, then nodded. They sat across from each other. No raised voices, no tears, just truth, finally stripped of illusion. "I didn't think it would get this far," he said. She listened. "I didn't think I'd lose everything." She tilted her head slightly. "You didn't lose everything," she said. He looked up hopefully. "You still have your child," she continued. "You just lost the version of yourself that thought actions didn't matter." The words landed heavy. His regret began there. Not loud, not dramatic, just a deep, sickening realization. He had traded something irreplaceable for something temporary, and now there was no undoing it. Later that night, he stood in the doorway of the nursery, watching her rock the baby gently. The room glowed softly. He felt like an intruder. "I'm sorry," he said. The words sounded inadequate even to him. She didn't turn around. "I know," she replied. 2 words. No comfort, no forgiveness, just acknowledgement. That night, Daniel cried alone. For the first time, not for fear of consequences, but for the weight of what he had destroyed. And in the other room, she slept peacefully because her world was no longer built on him. Regret doesn't arrive all at once. It settles in layers. Daniel learned that quickly. The suspension came first. Pending review, they said. His badge stopped working. Access revoked. He carried his things out in a cardboard box while coworkers pretended not to see. The hallway felt longer than it ever had before. For the first time, his reputation was louder than his resume. At home, the news didn't change much. She listened quietly as he explained. No shock, no panic. "I'll figure something out," he said desperately. She nodded. "I'm sure you will." Her calm felt unbearable. It was the calm of someone who had already planned for loss. The phone stopped ringing. Friends he used to meet for drinks stopped replying to texts. Invitations dried up. When he did see familiar faces, conversations felt strained, polite, short. People knew, and knowing changed everything. One night, he overheard someone whisper at a gathering, "That's him." The words followed him like a shadow. At home, the baby reached milestones effortlessly, rolling over, grabbing fingers, recognizing her voice. She celebrated quietly, took photos, kept notes. Daniel asked once, "Did she smile today?" "Yes," she said. "When?" "This morning." He nodded, disappointment flashing across his face. He had been out. Again. Money became a conversation. A careful one. She brought out her notes, budgets, plans. He stared at the numbers, overwhelmed. "You've thought about this," he said. "Yes," she replied, "while you thought everything would stay the same." The final blow came unexpectedly. A former colleague declined a reference. "Too risky," they said. "I can't be associated right now." That night, Daniel broke. He sat on the floor of the shower, water running cold, head in his hands. This wasn't about losing a job anymore. It was about losing identity. He came out late, eyes red. She was in the nursery, humming softly. "I don't recognize myself," he said hoarsely. She didn't stop rocking. "That's what happens," she replied gently, "when you live 2 lives for too long." For the first time, he truly saw her, not as a wife, not as someone who would forgive, but as someone who had survived him. That realization cut deeper than punishment ever could. Regret grew heavy, not dramatic, not performative, just constant. It followed him through empty days and silent nights. And while it consumed him, she continued to rise, quietly, without looking back. The public exposure didn't come with a headline. It came with silence. The kind of silence that spreads when people decide, collectively, to step away. Daniel felt it everywhere. At the cafe, where the barista stopped asking how his day was. At the gym, where familiar faces avoided eye contact. Online, where messages went unanswered and names quietly disappeared from his circle. No one argued with him. No one defended him. They simply let him fade. The woman he had risked everything for stopped calling. At first, he didn't notice. He was too consumed by damage control. Emails, applications, apologies that went nowhere. Then one day, he checked his phone. No messages, no missed calls. He stared at the screen longer than necessary. When he finally tried to reach her, the call went straight to voicemail. Blocked. That realization hit harder than he expected. Not because he loved her,
but because it confirmed what he had refused to accept. He had been disposable to her, just as he had treated his own family. At home, consequences arrived differently, not with arguments, not with ultimatums, with distance. She moved through the house like someone passing through a space that no longer belonged to her emotionally, focused, efficient, unreachable. Daniel tried to reconnect through the baby. Can I feed her? Do you need help tonight? I can take her so you can rest. Sometimes she said yes, sometimes she said no. Either way, it changed nothing, because care without presence couldn't rebuild trust. One evening, as he watched her buckle the baby into the car seat, he finally asked, "Are you going to leave?" The question trembled. She didn't answer right away. She adjusted the strap, checked it twice. Then she looked at him. "I'm already gone," she said quietly. "I just haven't moved my body yet." The words landed like a verdict. That night, he sat alone in the living room long after she'd gone to bed. The house felt larger now, colder. He replayed moments he'd ignored. Her silence, her restraint, her strength. He had mistaken dignity for weakness. That mistake had cost him everything. The final professional rejection arrived in the form of an email. "After careful consideration, we've decided to move forward with another candidate." He closed the laptop slowly. No anger, no denial. Just understanding. This wasn't bad luck. This was consequence. Meanwhile, she received an email of her own. A flexible role, remote, stable, not glamorous, but secure. She read it twice, then closed the laptop and looked at her sleeping child. A future, quiet, sustainable, opening in front of her. She didn't celebrate loudly. She simply exhaled. Daniel noticed the change. Her posture straighter, her movements lighter. "What happened?" he asked. "I found something," she replied. He waited. He waited. "For us?" he asked hopefully. She shook her head. "For me." That was the moment regret fully settled in. Not sharp, not explosive, permanent. Later that night, he stood outside the nursery door listening to her hum softly to the baby. He remembered how she had endured labor in silence, how she had rebuilt without rage, how she had never once tried to destroy him, and how, somehow, that had destroyed him anyway. Some losses scream. Others whisper until there is nothing left to say. Daniel's regret did the latter. And in the quiet aftermath of his collapse, she stood, finally free.
I tell stories like this here, quietly, honestly, and without exaggeration. If this one stayed with you, subscribing means you won't miss the next.